Always keep in mind that we are talking here as partners, not as protagonists. The odds we face in getting our rights respected and our self-determined development operationalized are many. So our approach should be geared towards strengthening partnership so that we can consolidate our strength and gains to confront these odds. Other highlights of this forum include a regional focus on indigenous peoples of the Arctic region. The discussion on the Arctic will take place on 21 May and will be launched by a panel comprised of states, regional organizations, and indigenous organizations. Today, we will also have a discussion on corporations and indigenous peoples, including interventions by permanent forum members who were appointed by the forum to consider this issue. A representative of the Secretary General Special Representative on Business and Human Rights will make a statement under this agenda item. Next week, on the morning of Wednesday, 27 May, under Emerging Issues, we have decided to have a discussion on the impact of the global economic and financial crisis on indigenous peoples. This crisis presents serious adverse impacts on us, but also opens up some opportunities. It is without any doubt that this crisis was brought about by policies of deregulation, liberalization, and privatization, which are the main features of the dominant globalized economic model. Indigenous peoples have consistently criticized this model for breeding further inequalities and for being very unsustainable. The discussion will be launched with a panel comprised of Mr. Jomo Sundaram, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development, a representative of Guatemala, a representative of the World Bank, and myself. Once again, during the afternoon of Wednesday, 20 May, there will be a dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms of Indigenous Peoples, Mr. James Anaya, and also with Mr. Jose Carlos Morales, a representative of the expert mechanism on the rights of indigenous peoples. Let me turn to three important processes that I was involved with in this past year. The first one was the International Expert Group meeting on extractive industries, indigenous people's rights, and corporate social responsibility, which was held in Manila, Philippines, from 27 to 29 March 2009. This expert meeting was organized by Tubtuba Foundation in cooperation with the Secretariat of the Permanent Forum. The expert meeting came about because indigenous peoples have consistently expressed the need to address human rights and economic development issues in relation to extractive industries. It was noted that all the corporations, due to pressures and struggles from indigenous peoples, are now more willing to consult. These efforts fall short of the standard of free, prior, and informed consent. There is a major problem with the lack of full disclosure of information regarding environmental, social, cultural, and human rights impact. One frequently encountered problem was that corporations, in collusion with government authorities, select indigenous individuals or specific communities with which to negotiate without ensuring that they represented their communities and or the impacted area. By doing this, they divide the indigenous peoples within the communities. Further, participants expressed frustration that extractive industries often treated benefit sharing and social programs as charity rather than a human rights issue. The report of this meeting can be found in Conference Room Paper 8. The second meeting I wanted to mention was mentioned by our President of the General Assembly, the Indigenous Peoples Global Summit on Climate Change, which was held in Anchorage, Alaska. This meeting was attended by around 400 indigenous representatives from 80 countries of the permanent 7 regions. This summit was preceded by several regional summits and workshops on climate change, which included the Asia Summit, the Latin American Summit, the Africa Summit, and a workshop on climate change impacts and adaptation strategies for Arctic on indigenous communities. The Global Summit made a number of recommendations, and some of these included calling upon the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change decision-making bodies to establish formal structures and mechanisms for the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and to recognize and respect the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in climate change decisions, policies, and programs. A special mention should also be made that on 22 April 2009, the UN General Assembly adopted a unanimous resolution designating April 22 each year as International Mother Earth Day. This initiative was sponsored by Bolivia and 50 other countries. The most recent task which the forum did was a mission to the Chaco region of Bolivia and Paraguay to look into the situation of forced labor and semi-slavery of the Guarani and other indigenous peoples. This is in response to Recommendation 156 of last year's report, which expressed our concern on this issue. We were invited by President Hugo of Paraguay and President Evo Morales of Bolivia to visit the Chaco region. 4 members of the forum, Lars Anders Behr, Bartolome Clavero, Carlos Mamani, and myself undertook this mission from April 25 to May 6, 2009. We were joined by the representatives of the ILO, FAO, UNDP, and the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. We visited several villages and held meetings with indigenous persons who are victims of forced labor and servitude. We also met with members of the cattle ranchers associations, with different government ministers, with officials of judiciary and legislative bodies, with NGOs, and with indigenous peoples organizations, not only in Bolivia and Paraguay, but also from other Latin American countries. In closing, I would like to reiterate my thanks to my co-members of the Permanent Forum for their hard work over the past year. Permanent Forum members have engaged with various processes at the national, regional, and international level to facilitate the implementation of the Forum's recommendations and raise awareness of the issues important for indigenous peoples. You have all been good team players, which is what we need for us to effectively carry out our mandate. I would also like to thank the Secretariat, who has been tirelessly working not only to prepare for this session, but for keeping the fire burning in between sessions. I would like to thank the representatives of indigenous peoples' organizations and nations, the governments, the members of the Interagency Support Group on Indigenous Issues, and the support NGOs who likewise have done their share in helping implement the Permanent Forum's recommendations, as well as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Finally, I would like to pay tribute to the indigenous peoples of the world who continue to struggle for their rights and are trying their very best to implement their own development visions and priorities. We remember those who have sacrificed their lives in these struggles. We should not forget that we are not here for ourselves, but for the many who continue to suffer from racism, discrimination, and oppression, and who cannot be with us here. Most of you have traveled for many days and from faraway places to participate in this session. Let us all work together to make this session meaningful and worthwhile for all indigenous peoples. Dr. Lai, salamat ko kapag na kayo amin. Mun gasing-gasing tako ay wala kayo na aming nilunguris na ikakangan Permanent Forum. Thank you very much.